Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Learning from Queensland's Regional Innovation and Entrepreneurial Hotspots. So today we've got three speakers, all chomping at the bit and lots of things to talk about. So I think we might just get straight into it. I'm Nicole Price, and I'm from the Clean Growth Choices Consortium, and I'm going to be hosting today's webinar. And this is actually the second last webinar in our series of webinars that are part of the Communities in Transitions program. And for those of you who are not familiar with the program, it's a Queensland government funded project that's been running now for about 2 years. And this project is all about innovation. So basically these 6 regional communities have been looking at their values and what values they want to take into the future, what their challenges are, what they do well, what they could do well in the future. And all those discussions sort of morphed into working groups that were developing business cases on projects they wanted to take forward. And they've been bundled up into a roadmap that will help those communities transition into a more economically resilient and environmentally sustainable future. So the Clean Growth Choices Consortium, which is actually made up of the University of Southern Queensland, James Cook University, CSIRO and the Eco-Efficiency Group, have been working alongside those communities in that process. So if you are interested in finding out more about the project, I recommend you go to our Clean Growth Choices website. So the whole concept of building resilience and finding value in doing things differently has probably never been more relevant. And the good news is that Queensland has a really strong propensity for innovating and problem solving. And that's what I really like about these examples on these slides. It's showing innovators that they're focusing on their region's strength and taking it one step further. So there was a recent survey done and it found that over half of Queenslanders at some point in time had an idea that they thought they could actually take to the point of commercialisation or some sort of social application. So we've got 65% of Queenslanders wanting to be actively involved in innovation, but half of those not sort of really knowing how to get involved. So really our webinar today is about how can we get regions to build an environment around all these innovators that's going to help them take an idea to reality and in that process help their communities become more resilient. So we're going to hear from 3 really inspiring individuals that seem to have endless energy and enthusiasm for building these types of environments to support innovation in regional Queensland. So I'll let them introduce themselves a bit later on, but we've got Chad, who's travelled all over Queensland and also the US, exploring actually who's doing this well. And we've also got Julia and Jerome, who are passionately supporting the Gundawindi community, who is absolutely thriving on innovation. Now, I just want to show you one last slide before we get going. And really, it's just a little small lens into the innovation in Gundawindi. So you can see they've got this ag tech innovation that's world leading. Jerome's going to talk a little bit more about that later. In addition, we've got services in the community looking about how they can do this better, right down to the pharmacist who's travelled around the world looking at innovation and introduced things like robotic medication dispensing. And then you've got a huge number of businesses that are embracing sustainability and using really innovative marketing strategies like their month-long Discovery Farming Festival that is taking people out of the city and onto their farms. And really excitingly, they've got some Indigenous businesses now that are really finding innovative ways to share, I guess, what's old knowledge and wisdom. So on that high note, let's get started. So we're going to run things a little bit differently today than what we usually do. So I'm going to start with just an opening question. And so when you respond, Chad, Julie and Jerome, could you just start with a bit of a rundown about yourselves and what you do? And to the listeners, if you've got any questions, please just fill in the Q&A question at the bottom of the screen, and we'll devote some time at the end of the discussions to answer those. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen. So my opening question is, in Queensland, we've seen this emergence of support measures for individuals that want to take an idea to reality. So there's sort of entrepreneurial measures, incubators, startups, accelerators, those sorts of things. But now with coronavirus, we're going to be starting to see a huge number of existing businesses, community groups, government bodies, all wanting to do things differently, better, which is, I guess, the essence of innovation. So do you think that regional areas are in a good place to support these groups? And what measures can you see going to work really well? And what new measures could you introduce to help? That's it. That's the question. So Chad, do you want to start?
Sure. I'll throw a few thoughts in. Definitely keen to hear from Jerome and Julie as well. It's an honor to be here. Just a bit of background on who I am and what I do. So one of my main focus areas is how we support regions to do entrepreneurship better. It was a focus of my studies, and I grew up in a family business manufacturing outside of a city center, in a semi-regional area, and going through that whole process of growth. How do we transform? What support services do we have in the U.S. in a manufacturing company? And that experience has led me into doing various things in my career, ending up where I was running an innovation hub just outside of Brisbane and Ipswich for a while. Then working for the Office of the Queensland Chief Entrepreneur, then hitting the road to say, well, how do we do this stuff better? Because like you said, Nicole, we saw this explosion of innovation hubs and co-working spaces and investment and startups and entrepreneurs and this whole narrative and the ideas boom of 2015. And then all the states followed suit. And here in Queensland, we had advanced Queensland programs happening. But what is the real impact that we're having, and how do we best support? Because it is all about the entrepreneurs. We have to focus on the entrepreneurs, but what is that support structure that we need? So a lot of my roles, both as Director of Startup Status, as the Managing Director for the Global Entrepreneurship Network in Australia, as well as working both with QUT and USQ, the Rural Economy Center of Excellence, as a research fellow. I work with governments, universities, corporates, entrepreneurs, support networks, and the entrepreneurs themselves to say, how do we advance this? And it's an interesting question you pose as far as, what is the impact of COVID-19? Because what that's done overnight is it's just transformed business models. Anything that had to do with physical space, anything that had to do with physical connection, a lot of the supply chains have been shut down or transformed. We have airplanes, our passenger planes now filled up with meat flying all over the place. How do we navigate all that? And then of course with the trade impacts as well. So it's like all these disruptions on top of disruptions. But what we see, like the businesses that were, especially in regional areas, which is our focus here, like that they're naturally inclined to find a way out. Like it's just survival, and I got to do this and I got to do that. And then how do I, and it's almost like they don't see it as a, like it's a challenge, like definitely it's impacting, but it's always something to be overcome. And that starts getting into this entrepreneurial mindset, which we do have quite strongly in the regional areas. It's just what do I got to do? Common sense. How do I get over that next thing? And what is available to me to do it? And I think that's where these networks come in. And we'll hear from Julie a little bit more on the overarching network and Jerome on how he's accessed that. And we're seeing these emerge across Australia. And there's some really good work being done by Advanced Queensland in partnership with a program called MIT REAP, which is doing some things as well, which is how do we bring different people together, different groups, from your Chamber of Commerce, from your government, the university sector to provide talent, the small business communities, the professional services, all focused on how do we support the entrepreneur to help their journey and give them the resources they need, at the same time getting out of the way so they can just run fast. Getting that balance right, that's the magic, that's the tricky bit. And I think, specifically to some of the work that we've done in Gannawindi, it's also very much around finding the leaders that are already doing it and how do we equip them? How do we unshackle them and support them to do? So like in Gannawindi, Julia's kind of been doing a lot of the good work already. Jerome has been sitting there really focusing on some of the technology application out there. So we need to look at that with them being the focus and saying, what support networks do they need to be able to help them build, grow, and scale?
Julia, would you like to add to Chads?
Oh,
Thoughts?
I'm always happy to add, Nicole, you know that. So thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I want to acknowledge the Big and Bull people from traditional owners from the Gundawindi area, and I know we represent lots of different parts, and there's lots of really familiar faces on the attendees today. So I want to acknowledge the Big and Bull people. I guess I really there's a couple of things that came up in what Chad was talking about. First of all, in terms of who I am, I do call Gundawindi home. I came for a 3-month contract about 10 or 12 years ago and never went home. But I've always lived and worked across southwest Queensland, really, and always in an extension role around sustainable agriculture. So initially with the horticulture industry for a few years, then with land care and catchment groups for 10 years or so, and for the last 7 years in my own consulting business. And I guess part of what has really attracted me to be in an extension type role, and even as a consultant, that's really a lot of what I do, getting people together, working out what we need to do, and then just getting on with it. I think in some ways the regions have the ability to cut through a little bit. And part of what we're seeing at the moment in terms of, linking it back from the COVID side of things, part of what we're seeing at the moment is the ability for people who usually can make things really complicated. They have found a way to cut through and simplify stuff. Decisions are being made quicker. Good is better than perfect. Stuff is happening, and if it's not right, well, we'll fix it along the way. So that's actually been awesome. Like, it's not good that it's taken a world health pandemic for that to be the case, but actually all of a sudden we've got these really big, clunky agencies, advocates, councils, universities, Queensland and federal governments that are all of a sudden actually kind of working like the rest of us have always worked, where we can cut through, we try something, if it doesn't work, we try it a different way, whatever it might be. So I actually have been involved with a few conversations where I have been asking, how do we hold on to some of the stuff that we've worked out as business as usual moving forward? How can we actually stay a bit more agile with our decision making? How do we make things a bit easier? How do we stop waiting for perfect, because we know it never exists, and yet that seems to be we can't launch anything or do anything or fund anything until it's perfect. So I've been really excited actually to see how governments, particularly at all levels, have really kind of embraced this. Well, we've just got to have a crack, because I reckon that's actually how most of us roll on a fairly regular basis. Initially, if we look at broadly across the regions, so I really hang out in regional areas. I live in Gundawindi, but I work in nearly all of the regions across Queensland in some way or another over time. And I think what was a real challenge at the beginning was actually a lot of us didn't identify in the innovation space. And Chad's done really great work about how do we all connect in and what does this ecosystem look like and who actually plays a role. Because for a long time, people that were right in the middle of it didn't actually identify with it. They identified as a innovative small business rather than a startup, or they, the definite where they sort of found their tribe, where they were hanging out, wasn't where others were looking. So we had a long time where government might be looking for innovative scale-ups. Nobody regionally was identifying with that. So they'd say, oh, well, there's nobody doing innovation in Gundawindi. And yet there's heaps happening. We just all kind of slightly missed each other in the, in the scene, because we weren't kind of looking in the right places. And that's why I think we were so lucky to be able to, as a community, be part of a project like Communities in Transition, and so lucky to be part of this Clean Growth Choices. And through that work, be able to attach to the likes of Chad and Ben Lyons and the others, is because actually sometimes it takes outsiders to help us join the links of what's happening internally as well, and actually help us kind of address some of that stuff, I think. So we were all here, and there are the right people in the right places across the state, if we think about it from a Queensland perspective. we actually just sometimes need some of those external people to help us join the dots of what we haven't sometimes necessarily seen. It's all happening. It just needs a little bit of stitching together a bit. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Julia. And who does the stitching?
Look, I think everybody is a stitcher, really, at heart. I'm maybe going to buck the trend. I know this whole hashtag about, hashtag give first, and I find that really painful because that assumes that then there's somebody who's going to give second and third. So I just think it should be hashtag give, let's actually just use that as our basis, because then we're not sitting there waiting for who's going to be second and third. So I probably have just upset lots of people around that, but I just find that that's not really how most of us roll, because I think everybody plays a role. It's just around working out who has capacity and confidence sometimes is actually what the key is. And people being, in some cases, brave enough to actually talk about it. Some of the challenges in the regions is we sometimes don't want to tell people what we're doing in case it fails. Or in some cases, we don't want to tell people what we're doing in case it succeeds. So we've got a lot of cultural stuff going on that is not unique to the regions, but there's not that many of us, so it shines through a bit more often. And I think that's sometimes some of the challenge around who is doing the stitching is it does take those really good, strong community groups, which is why the ecosystem work is so important. Because in some circumstances, it's an individual. In others, and that individual could be in council, or it could be a small business, or it could be a chamber, or it could be a land care coordinator. There's that role can be taken up by anybody in the community. And every community would be able to identify who their stitcher or stitchers are, I reckon.
Yeah, and I'll echo that. And some of the things that you mentioned there, Julia, it's capability, it's capacity, trust is a big one. It often does come down to that individual, and you mentioned the word ecosystem, and using that metaphor, it's the keystone species that are there, where that one person then acts as the node, and they may not even actually deliver like anything in specific, but their main value is just in that connection between everything else. And we test that. So when I go to regions, I often ask the question, so if you have an idea to do something new, something that maybe gets people outside of your region interested in it, maybe get some money outside, using new sorts of technology, who do you go to? And what we try and pick up on is there a name that keeps coming up? And then what you do is you look at that person, you say, okay, well, how do we build everything around them? And quite often that's where the organization comes in, where maybe we create a group like the Gunawindi Innovation Network or something like that, that actually gets a bit more legitimacy, some substance, some stability. So it's not so dependent just on the individual, and we try and build up that around it. So that then, because when Jerome's there saying, look, I just want to do my thing in a region, it makes it a lot easier for him just to kind of get on with it. One other thing I'll just mention there, you mentioned the whole thing of kind of before people not necessarily identifying with startups and that whole language. We have to acknowledge that for a long time, there was a value to the term and a weighting to the term startup, to the term entrepreneur, and we can test that by saying, hey, there's a bunch of funding for startups. Well, next thing you know, we got a bunch more startups because people want the funding. We have a bunch of funding for entrepreneurs. Hey, overnight we'll create a whole bunch of entrepreneurs. Or entrepreneurs are destroying jobs and they're taking them offshore. Pretty soon everybody doesn't want to be associated with an entrepreneur. And so really what we're seeing now is just simply business and new ways of doing business. I think COVID has really started that conversation. It's helped with that conversation, saying, look, we just got to do something new. Let's get rid of all the language. Let's get rid of all the techie type concepts. And we just have to do new, and people like Jerome as a person doing new. So then how do we get behind it?
And I'd probably just like to echo that. Hi, everyone. I've been a bit silent so far, but, Chad just raised something. When we talk about startups, we talk about innovation, entrepreneurs, and all the rest of it. Everyone just automatically thinks of Facebook, Zuckerberg, like these tech giants that get created overnight. It's maybe a bit hypocritical because my business literally is tech and literally in that space. But it's not just that. Like, innovation has been happening, especially in the regions and especially in agriculture in Queensland for years. Like, it's not a novel concept. Every single farmer is tinkering with something to make their planter better, their agricultural operation better, their feeders. Like, we are perpetually innovating. I suppose when we talk about, you know, this entrepreneurship or innovation, is how then does the farmer, how then do the individuals within those communities create a product to be able to then go and sell that to the rest of the world, or to the rest of Australia, or to their communities. And so, you know, I kind of peel back this innovation. It's basically, how do we solve the problem and do it in a way where it can be sustainable from a community point of view, from a business point of view, and hopefully all three. And so how do we actually start to build those types of products and systems? And I think that's probably something that the Goondiwindi region has been able to do quite successfully. Me and my wife moved here about 3-4 years ago. But there was a lot of that innovation and embedded within the community. There was a lot of those peoples that had tried to build something, some successfully and some, to be honest, not successfully. But that innovation, it wasn't taboo that someone's trying to do something innovative. And then, you know, we talked about, you know, who are the connecting people within the actual, in our community. So, you know, Julia, for us, is an incredible resource for the community, because she knows everyone in and around and outside of our community. So we ask her one question, and next thing you know, you've got a page full of contacts to ring. And then all of a sudden that door's open. And then, you know, we get people like Chad that come to the community and to the region and say, listen, you know, you don't need a $3 million building. You've actually got an innovative hub. How do we actually start to create some more structure around that, so people can share their ideas and use the learnings from different businesses and different products, procedures, and all the rest of it, so we can actually grow the community, grow the business base to be able to export this to the rest of Australia and the world. So yeah, it's important to have those connectors. And every community has one. That person that has the ideas, that loves to connect people, or is that just that mad scientist that's able to just develop products? How do you get around those types of people to build a thing that the community is really good at, instead of trying to do everything for everyone and anything, I suppose. So, yeah.
So Jerome, yesterday you were saying that you would like to see Goondiwindi sort of possibly be the next Silicon Valley. There's sort of a social aspect to that. You need to attract the people to your area and retain the people in your area. How important do you think that social aspect is in terms of a region that wants to foster innovation?
Sure. Well, Goondiwindi is kind of the ag tech capital of Australia. So if you look on a per capita basis, there's a lot of innovation that's come out of this neck of the woods, whether it be RTK, GPS, you know, spot sprayers, the world's longest sprayer. There's just a list of things, some of the things that Goanna Telemetry are doing with their remote sensing and all the rest of it. They're some of the best companies and ag tech companies out there in the world. And so on a per capita basis, Goondiwindi has that ability. But if we're being honest, we're not recognised globally as being the ag tech powerhouse that I think that we are. And so how do we start to do that? Well, we've got to build this ecosystem, attract the world's best programmers, engineers, all those people to town. And what do we need to do? Well, we need to make sure that there's a lifestyle that's conducive to attracting those types of people. Goondiwindi is very lucky in the sense that it has a very, very good lifestyle, especially when you compare it to rural towns around Australia. But we can't rest on our laurels, and if we want to become the best and the place that people want to come, then we've got to make sure that we're speaking to those people and building that ecosystem, building that community culture that will foster and attract the people that we want. And so that's through events, that's through a myriad of different programs that the community is slowly but surely building and being recognised for. So, yeah.
What are your thoughts on that Julia? So Jerome's talking about events and a myriad of other things. What sort of things were you thinking there? And
yeah, so there's a couple of things you know, and Jerome and Emma are a great example of of a business who's been able to employ intelligent people and get them to move to Gundawindi. And I think also, and I know Trent Murray is on the call with from Gundy Communications and Country Broadband Network. You know, these are skilled roles that we are able to grow in the business now that weren't there beforehand. So it's providing us a whole new sector, really, of work, of skills, of people where we haven't necessarily needed or had those people locally. So that's pretty exciting. And that's pretty exciting when you look at it from the schools and the high school all the way through. We actually have whole new industries that are happening in town that wasn't there before. Manufacturing, we've got producers who are going from just growing a product and selling it bulk through to producing, you know, completely value-added products now. You know, that creates a whole new part of a supply chain, particularly in agriculture, that we've not had locally before. So that is really, really exciting in terms of bringing that skill set to our community that hasn't sat there before. So that's part of it. I think the other thing, though, that we need to be able to do and we need to get better at doing is actually sharing our stories, actually having opportunities like this where we can talk about, hey, we actually thought this was normal. We thought every community did this. And now we've realised, because we've talked to a few other people who trip around to other communities, and really we're pretty unique. We actually have got some really cool stuff happening in this community that doesn't happen elsewhere. We actually need to get better at telling our stories. We have had individual people helping one of the countries in the stands. I say Turkmenistan, but I may have completely made that up. But we've got an individual cotton grower, some individual harvesters, some individual farmers who are working with a whole other country to develop cotton and teaching them how to grow cotton, plant it, harvest it in another part of the world. Like massive, massive stuff that is happening in Gundawindi and using people from Gundawindi. There's no federal government project backing it. There's no DFAT report that's going to come out of it at the end. It's actually randomly somebody here knows somebody over there. And as a result, this whole thing is happening. And yet you talk to them and they're like, yeah, no, it's pretty cool. Like, yeah, it's just, you know, they rang. And so, yeah, we said we'd never been there. And so let's go, you know, it's bloody amazing. And yet there's people in town down the main street who don't even know that that's happening, let alone singing that from the rooftop. So there's this piece around how do we actually identify that our business as usual is pretty cool and actually we're, you know, leading the crowd in some ways in what we're doing, and how do we actually put some of that forward, and that's some of the stuff that I think in terms of if we're looking at this innovation network and us coming together in more of a structured setting than we maybe have in the past, part of that has to be around how we promote businesses like Jerome, because we need Jerome and Emma to do well in their business for the community to do well. And I think that's the piece for me that I've always loved about regional work is actually this isn't about me being the only business that does well, because I need everybody else in the main street of Gundawindi to do well for me to have a chance in hell of my business working. We actually, as a group, all need to help each other out, because without one of us, if a few people start to drop, like Chad said, we come back to the, you know, the natural ecosystem. We lose too many. We have a few pockets of really rare people that we need to hold on to. So, you know, I think that's the piece for me that's really important with what we need to be able to do. And I think the clean growth choices helped do that. Like, we were pretty chuffed to be one of 6 communities across the state to be chosen to be part of that project. That was pretty amazing. That was pretty exciting. The town, you know, we got a real boost from being able to be part of that project.
Oh, I think we were pretty happy to have you. And Chad, what do you think?
I absolutely love that what Julia said, and I think that's a quote for every single region. We need Jerome to do well for the community to do well. Because when you think about the ecosystem, like everyone in that ecosystem, if you get it right, and it is a take on the give first. I think give first can be a bit of a misnomer and it can be misused. I totally agree with you, Julia. The intent behind it, the ethos behind it is
I'll give you that, Chad. I'll give you that then.
No, I totally agree with you there, because it's been taken out of context so many times. But I think the intent behind it is, I need you to be a success for me to be a success. So how can I help you? Yes, I need to be sustainable. I got to feed myself, and I can do that in part by making sure that you give it a go. So I think that one of the things that and probably 80–90% of the work I do, it's acknowledging the builders. And so the entrepreneurs are absolutely critical, and the people that support the entrepreneurs are important. It is not an either or. And for too often it is either entrepreneurs are the center and they have to be the one and only, and university and government get out of the way, or university and government is absolutely critical in order to create the framework by which entrepreneurs can succeed. I think both of those are in part true. And one of the questions that came up in the Q&A is around Andrea saying we need these connectors as well, because Julia can do a fantastic job as a node and a nexus in that community and out, but then she also needs to be able to then pass to other people that can be that boundary spanner. One of my visions is that every single region has not just a region to region connection, but a precinct to precinct connection. Who is the Julia in Botswana, in South Africa, in some place that is parallel enough to Ganawindi, where it makes sense to have a really deep relationship? I think every region in Australia needs that direct connection. We are starting to see that from the MedTech Accelerator down in Melbourne with medical equipment and medical technologies over into Asia, Bridge Hub with agriculture directly into Israel, QT-CEA directly into Asia with their creative industries. And so I think that's the kind of deep relationships we need. Programs like Clean Growth Choices, as Julia said, it kind of gives a bit of a shot in the arm and a bit of a pride to the community. It also helps mobilize them, because all this stuff is a bit of an abstract and academic, and that's we're actually solving a problem. And I sat in on a few of those Clean Growth Choices, and one of the beauties of it is it gets the entire community around, all the different representation, to say, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And we learn to be an ecosystem by solving a problem, by putting our hand to the till, not by talking about being an ecosystem. Let's get out of the existential conversation, actually get on with it, and that'll help develop the capability. And the last point I'll just comment on, so therefore, what do these builders do? And I see in the participant list, there's a lot of people out there that this is what they've committed their life to, is supporting building these up in the region. And so how do we then help them connect and learn, so that Julia can connect with her counterparts all across Australia and the world, and learn both locally, nationally, and globally? How do we help them build personal capability? This is an emerging profession. All of us are making it up as we go. Somebody has done what we're doing before. How do we learn from them? How do we give representation and advocacy? Telling the story is so critical. Creating the proper narrative around economic diversification, around new ideas, the story that Jerome tells as far as being able to build it into existing established businesses and make that happen faster, reduce the friction. How do we provide access to information? So that everybody knows the same thing, so we even the playing field as much as possible. How do we create some standards of practice around this? If Julia is going to be setting up an innovation hub, and we have an innovation hub up in Rocky and an innovation hub up in Cairns, how do we create a bit of a commonality so when people see innovation hub, we say, okay, I know what one of those is. Otherwise, we just keep defining it every time we spin them up. And finally, how do we get the research? How do we get the data and the measurement so that, definitely there's a lot of passion and good things happening out of Ganawindi. Let's get some numbers behind it so we can actually say empirically, we have 3.2 Jeromes in 7.5 years. What are some of those numbers that we can start pumping into?
I don't think I've ever been turned into a metric, Chad.
120%, mate.
There's a couple of things that you guys kind of raised. So one of the things was, with the Clean Growth Choices, one of the things that we identified is what are those problems? And we had a long list of the things that we wanted to do better, could do better as a community. And then part of the process, one of the things that we did is we actually went and eliminated a couple of them or amalgamated them and started to focus some of our resources and attention and community brain power around solving probably the big levers or the things that we had an unfair advantage over other communities around Queensland and around Australia. So, trying to identify what is it that our community does or could do that few or no people would be able to to do or replicate, and really kind of anchoring ourselves around that. And then the other one was, you know, how do we create those community connectors and those types of things? And I think what might be really interesting, you know, Julia now has a business. She has a bunch of people that work with her, and she's growing her team. But, you know, if you're a community and you don't have a Julia, or there is a Julia and she hasn't gotten started and she doesn't have all this infrastructure and the connections that she's grown over time, how could, I suppose, how could you create or get behind that person for them to be able to do that? And part of my thought was, Julia, why, you know, how did you get started in all of this? And I suppose, what were some of the processes or the steps that you got from being single Julia to starting to grow the teams, and I suppose connecting with all the different communities? You know, how did you actually do that? And
Yeah,
what
I think
was,
that's
your journey?
a great question, Jerome.
Jerome. So a couple of things, right? And not to go through the depths of my young 40 years, but I guess the reality is I grew up in a really small community. You know, I grew up on a family farm with a one teacher school down the road, and the expectation was, when we went to tennis days and dances and all of that kind of thing that was still around, that we all had to do something. We all had to contribute. It was everybody's job, whether you were 4, 14 or 104, you all had to contribute. So that from the outset has been a very strong value that from my family and my community has always been the case. So I guess that's one part of it. And the other part is that I have lived and worked in this region for nearly 40 years, whether it was Mitchell, Roma, Toowoomba, Gundawindi, whatever, you know. So I've done lots of different roles, but the community in itself hasn't changed. And we know that a lot of us have lived in this community for a long time. So I think for me, without sounding too kind of getting too wanky or whatever, I am very clear that my personal vision and my personal mission is to contribute to rural and regional Australia, and that I want to be part of viable and vibrant communities. So that's my personal vision. I was a terrible employee, as it turns out, and so I had to become my own boss. And so I've been able to pull that across into my own business. And again, I genuinely believe that people are generous. That is my genuine belief. And I have been on the receiving end of lots of generosity, and I try and give generosity whenever I can. Now, I know, you know, I know that sounds really wanky, but what it means is, you know, I've crossed paths with lots of people, you know, and I think the other thing that sometimes we forget from a regional perspective is that once you go past the Great Divide, if you went to boarding school, if you went to uni, if you've had a few different jobs in a few industries, the ag industry is really small. The NRM industry is really small. There's not that many of us. It's a big area, but there's still not that many of us. So actually, from a connection and a network perspective, I have found that those of us west of the divide have got much better networks across the whole state than those in southeast Queensland. So I will have a phone call from somebody in Brisbane and they're like, I need to talk to somebody in Longreach, but you won't know anybody. And I'm like, oh, well, I went to school with 2 people and went to uni with 5 people and met somebody at a BNS 10 years. You know, like, we actually all do know each other more than we probably think. And I think there's a lot of the communities are the same. So for me, it is around giving people, letting people have a chance. So we are very lucky in this part of the world to have the council that we have. We've got some new council laws at the moment, but we have got really great people in really key roles in our council, and they have given small businesses a crack when they could have outsourced some contracts and got somebody from Toowoomba or Brisbane or somewhere in northern New South Wales to do a project. So people backed me at key times when and that's given me the confidence and the ability to leverage. But the other piece that you bring on, and then I'll stop talking, is the next piece for me is, you know, it can't just be about me. So part of from a business perspective, I could make more money and have more profit if it was just me and I had a VA in Singapore or somewhere, right? Like I would have a more profitable business. That is not how, that's not my metrics. My metrics are, I do have a really random set of skills and abilities, and I want to bolt that onto more people. So I employ 3 people, and that is expensive as it turns out. But I would rather do that. I would rather do that and have us have more ability. There is more chance of us having viable and vibrant regional communities if there are more of me, and if that means I employ them and we can do that work, that actually sits better with me than a more profitable, lean business model. So that's my choices. There would be people here saying you're an idiot, and that's fine. But that's kind of how they're part of my personal reasons of why I do what I do, I guess. And I'm not unique in that. There are others that are like that, but maybe it's about how do we build more of us up.
Yeah, so what support structures have you had as an anchor that have really helped you, Julia? So you were saying that broad-based leadership in Goondiwindi is a really big one.
Absolutely.
Is there other things that you think, I'm just thinking of someone else in another regional area that doesn't have, is just starting with a clean slate almost. What sort of support structures could you have for them?
So depending on, you know, it is important to connect in with whatever the network is in the town. So when I lived in a town in Western Queensland, the only connector was the local rugby league club. That did the job of the chamber and the innovation network and the social group and the whatever. So that's where you went. That was it. You know, I met people and I did stuff with that group because that was the only group really. And so I think it is about, you know, it is this whole, whether it's mentors or mates, they're kind of the same thing in some ways, right? So we have got a lot of incredibly generous people who are the generation or two above Jerome, Chad and I. Jerome, you just got a lot older in that little combo there, but anyway, who are really keen. If they can see somebody who is prepared to have a go, they will support them. So ask, invite somebody for a coffee, ask to go and have a coffee with them, ask specifically what it is that you want. You know, I'm new to an area, or this is a project I want to do, what can I do? So I've been lucky in that some of my roles I had steering committees or I had voluntary committee people. So that was always a really good start and an ability for me to have that, you know, some of those old wise owls, I always call them, in my corner. But I just think it is about, we do need to, the only piece of courage you need is to actually ask for help. Once you've asked, everybody will chip in. So we do sometimes just need to be courageous and ask for help or ask for what it is that you need. And after that, the community will do their work.
It's funny, Julia, you know, especially in Goondiwindi, we have a lot of, you know, you talked about the older generation than us that have really been generous with their times and all the rest of it. And I found in my experience, all it costs you is a 6-pack. And you literally just rock up and you can literally talk to someone that's built a multi-million-dollar international export business, and they'll spend 4 or 5 hours with you every single quarter talking and dissecting your business, why you're doing it like this, you know. And then with the young ego that I had, a lot of the things that they told me 3 years ago are coming true. And I should have listened to them 3 years ago, but they're able to give you that kind of advice, and kind of see the future and guide you. And they're not trying to, they're trying to see you succeed in the different industries. And for mine's in agriculture, but it's quite amazing to see what some of these guys and how much time these guys are willing to give you if they just see you kind of not give up and just keep going. So. Yeah, asking, and especially in rural communities, I kind of echo what Julia said, is you just ask one person, and then they'll say, no, you need to talk to this person. And then all of a sudden you've got the person or the mentor or an advisor, or you know, they probably wouldn't want to be called a mentor or an advisor, but just someone that's kind of willing to help or give you some advice and guidance. So yeah, just asking is probably the first step. Yeah, and we've been pretty lucky in this community.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, sorry, go Jed.
Yeah, just briefly, one of the things I'll throw in there, and you know, putting myself in a position of a panelist watching this, thinking, well, what if either I don't have a Julia, or you know, maybe I am a Julia, and I'm trying to you know, maybe not getting the legitimacy and support that I need in my region, and it's struggling. Like some regions, it can, like, it's good and kind of windy because a lot of people just get it, and there's a lot of trust and a lot of introductions. And so, what would be that gap in you know, facilitating that to happen better? Like how do we equip those people who may be the connections, and also legitimize that as far as I've got a new idea, and actually start shifting some of that culture? Because Gunawindi has been unique in that culture has already been there. How do we facilitate that without, and that's part of one of the things I'm really focused on, is how do we do that without transplanting Julia? You know, I'm thinking about a dozen names across Queensland, across Australia, and even some of the names I see in the participants of, you know, doing it in some of the remote and regional areas, but they're not necessarily feeling maybe some of the connectivity that we're talking about in this conversation. And so therefore, how do we bring some of those ones together, like Julia, that you put on the list from the Ags Force and the peak bodies and the state governments and the chambers and the, you know, the PCYC, the economic development organizations, bringing them around the table on that journey.
So do you have a suggestion on how we do that, Chad?
I have ideas, but I'd be interested in, you know, Jules and Jerome, as far as your thoughts.
Jerome, you want to go first?
I was going to say, Julie, do you want to go first, seeing that we're trying to duplicate you and clone you? So
Yeah, I know. I am feeling we are way off topic for Nicole. But anyway, let's see if we come back on track at some stage, Nicole. I do like when it's all about me, though. No, just joking. I mean, why not this? You know, how could we do it where there's a clean growth choices? You know, everybody bring a mate. Andrea Chamberlain's on here from North Queensland. Andrea brings somebody. I bring somebody. Nathan brings somebody. You know, I mean, I was listing off economic development officers and Ag Force and people like that in terms of, you know, that role in some communities is what it is. In some of the places I've lived, it was the publican. You know, you all talked to him, and he or her knew what was going on everywhere. So, I mean, a Zoom would be a great way. Linking into your Slack channel could be another one, Chad. But I mean, you would love that this is something that an organisation or a business like Regional Australia Institute could do. I think that whilst I love, and I'm happy to connect, and I saw somebody is doing hub work in Victoria, so I'd be really keen to hear how that's going as well. I think it's really interesting that we have quite a huge investment in regional stuff that happens, not in the regions, but anyway. But the struggle is that there's lots of money around, right, for all of this to happen, and yet we could make it happen between now and this time next week, because we'd all just send a phone call, you know, we'd send an email and we'd have 50 of us from around the country on a call. And in some ways that might be what we need to do, Chad. And it's less about startup stuff, and it is more around that community connection, because again, some people might have seen this webinar and thought, oh, well, that's not for me, that's not the space that I'm in. So it's maybe, you know, spending 10 more minutes inviting somebody into a specific conversation. And look, if that was a legacy of this clean growth choices work, that would be even more amazing than what we've been able to achieve as the 6 communities that were part of it. If there was, whether it's a map or a whatever, but you know, if there were the group that came together around that could bounce off each other and ask each other questions, that'd be amazing.
What about going through the similar process, or literally kind of like we went through a bit of a process? You guys set up a process for us to, you know, identify the problems, cull them, to, you know, what were the specific ones, and then here's the actual projects or the things that we could do. I mean, that, you know, setting up that kind of process for people that weren't involved, you know, that weren't one of the 6, could be an amazing thing. And then start to connect in and, you know, be able to kind of connect with you guys, Nicole. how do they go through that process, or they might be able to contact Chad, Julie, or myself on how Gundawindi did it. And then that way every community around Australia has the ability to be able to do this and go and identify, the thing to help innovation, or really for me, it's just problem solve, find solutions to the potential problems that they have. Like one of the problems that we have in Gundawindi, like most rural communities, is internet and the connection. And so we have a local guy at Country Broadband Network that's basically building out rural communities. And how amazing would it be if Australian farmers and rural Australia had access to the internet? Imagine the amount of innovation that would happen, given how much innovation already happens. But now we look at a next wave of innovation in terms of the digital ag. Imagine if we gave that ability to farmers to be able to solve their own problems just by simply giving them an internet connection. So you've got people like Trent from Gundawindi Communications and the Country Broadband Network that are looking at how do you kind of set up these systems and these networks to be able to give access to our rural farms. And then that helps a business like myself, who's in big data and artificial intelligence, to be able to help farmers find insights from the data and the things that they're creating. I think it's just because there's a problem, the potential solution that we might find is actually a business model that we could go and replicate and scale to the rest of the world, just by literally trying to solve the problem in our community. I'm sure there's problems all around the communities in Queensland, and if you solve that, there's other communities around the world, or businesses or individuals that have that same problem, and you might actually have a product that you could help literally everyone around the world.
And I think you like with both of you said, I think taking the principles down from what just happened, like if we walk through, and it was clean growth choices, which then focused on the problems we want to solve, which then developed it, but we were very intentional then about creating this byproduct, which is this innovation network. So that was an outcome of that process. Whereas if we hadn't been intentional about that, we could have gone through, solved some problems, created some entrepreneurs, and then gone away. And 3 or 4 years later, that would have been just a thing that we did. So I think part of this then is, first, definitely a program like Clean Growth Choices is exceptional. I'm just taking a point on Sarah Cole's question when she says, when will Townsville be included in this network?
I saw that.
And for Sarah, it's taking apart, it could be tomorrow, meaning if you structure a program in a way, whether it's Clean Growth Choices or something like that, that brings people together to say, what are the problems we want to solve in our region? But what you're creating there is not necessarily solving the problem that brings them around, but you're also solving the additional problem on why didn't we get around the table in the first place? And creating what I like to refer to as the software in the region that then can handle these things in the future. So you want to create the structures which will be able to, a solving problem structure in addition to the actual programs that solve the problem. So it's that extra body on top that brings people around the table that I think is one of the exceptional outcomes from Gundawindi and the Gundawindi Regional Innovation Network that's been brought out of it.
Yeah, Amanda asked, when can other regions, join the program? So these 6 regions, we're really learning on our feet, what worked, and it has changed originally from the original plan of how it was going to roll out. So I think as we learn more from these 6 regions, I think the government would love other regions to come on board and follow the same process. So I'm going to have to wind it up now. So I just feel it's been a real privilege to talk to you guys. Do you have any last thoughts that you'd like to share? I was a bit disappointed because I actually wanted to really hear, Jerome, about your journey through the whole process, literally from just a light bulb moment to where you are now, and how different support structures have helped you and along the way. But we'll have to save that for another day. Maybe we'll just have a webinar just for you. Sounds like we need one for just all of you, actually. Again. All right, so thanks very much, guys. I just want to say our last webinar next week is Tamerlyn Brennan from Jobs Queensland, and her presentation is actually really timely as well. So it's looking at workforce planning for businesses, planning for coronavirus recovery and beyond. So that should be very interesting. You'll actually get a copy of today's presentation sent to you. So thanks again, Chad, Julian, Jerome, and also everyone that's tuned in today.
Too easy. Thank you so much for having us. If anyone is interested in technology and innovation, probably a bit more in that realm, feel free to reach out. info@infarm.io. Yeah, more than happy to field your questions, or if you guys have anything that you want to talk to me about, more than happy to answer those. So just sing out if you need. It's part of that rural community, you know. Just ask and you shall receive. So yeah.
Thanks, Jerome. That's very generous. I am always amazed at the generosity in rural communities. It's really there. Volunteerism is there. All right, Chad, Julia, any last words?
No, thanks. Thanks, Nicole, for all of your work through these webinars and for coming and visiting us in Gundy.
It was a pleasure. I have to say, I grew up in a rural town as well, and escaped as soon as I finished high school, and have been living in southeast Queensland, and coming out to Windy really opened my eyes. It's really exciting to see what's happening out there. Chad?
No, it's an honor to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity. And just experiencing the program and seeing what's happening in Windy and being a part of that's been, yeah, it's been a real privilege. And if anybody does get an opportunity, maybe we'll get Jerome back on a separate webinar so we can tell a story end to end, because it is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, good idea. All right, we'll keep posted on the Clean Growth Resources program.
See you later.
See you guys. Thank you.